Whenever we stayed over at my future mother-in-law's lake house, I'd black out cold by 10 o'clock and wake up with my swimsuit straps crossed wrong on my shoulders. My fiancé just said I drank too much rosé. Then I planted a voice recorder in the boathouse and heard my future brother-in-law tell someone to keep my thumb pressed to the screen because the banking app wouldn't unlock with a closed fist. Before I get into it, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had a family smile at you while quietly planning to ruin you, hit subscribe. My name's Imogen, I'm 31 and I do compliance audits for mid-sized credit unions across the Midwest, which is a polite way of saying I spend my days finding the places where people hide money they shouldn't have. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in Toledo, Ohio, raised by a single mom who worked double shifts at a hospital cafeteria so I could go to a decent state school without drowning in debt. I learned early that nobody hands you anything, and if you want something, you build it with your own 2 hands and you guard it like your life depends on it. That instinct kept me alive more than once, in ways I never imagined I'd need. I met Julian Ashworth at a financial conference in Chicago 2 years ago. He was funny in a way that caught me off guard, the kind of funny that made an entire dinner table laugh without him raising his voice. He worked in commercial real estate development, and his family, the Ashworths, owned half the lakefront property in a town outside Traverse City, Michigan, where they'd been old money for 3 generations. When he first took me up there to meet them, I remember feeling like I'd wandered onto the set of a movie I wasn't cast in. Cedar-shingled compound, private dock, a boathouse bigger than my mother's entire apartment. His mother, Adelaide, greeted me with a smile so polished it looked rehearsed and a hug that lasted exactly 2 seconds too short to mean anything. The pattern started on my second visit. We'd have a long dinner on the screened porch, wine flowing, Adelaide asking pointed little questions about where exactly I went to college and whether my mother still worked in food service. Then, like clockwork, somewhere around 9:30, a wave of exhaustion would hit me so hard it felt chemical. Not tired from a long week, tired, heavy, thick, like someone had poured wet concrete into my skull. I'd wake up hours later on the guest room bed, my bikini top crossed over the wrong shoulder, my hair damp like I'd been in the lake with absolutely no memory of getting there. The first time, I genuinely thought I'd had too much sun and wine. Julian laughed it off, said I always went down hard up north, must be the lake air. The second time, I asked more questions, and he got defensive in a way that didn't fit him. The third time, in late July, I woke up and noticed something that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. My phone, which I always kept face down on the nightstand, was face up, screen still glowing faintly, like it had just timed out from being used. I hadn't touched it in hours. I didn't say anything that weekend. I smiled through brunch with Adelaide, complimented her ridiculous lemon scones, and drove the 4 hours home with my hands tight on the wheel, my mind running through scenario after scenario like I was auditing a shell company, because that's what I do. I find the inconsistency nobody else notices and I follow it until it breaks open. 3 weeks later, I went back up for the 4th of July weekend, and this time I came prepared. I bought a tiny voice-activated recorder from an electronics store 2 towns over, paid cash, and tucked it behind a stack of life jackets on a high shelf in the boathouse, where the family always gathered after dinner for what Adelaide called nightcaps. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I'd find nothing and feel ridiculous and we'd laugh about it one day, years from now, the time I thought my future in-laws were drugging me at the lake. That Saturday night went exactly like the others. Dinner, wine, Adelaide's questions, the heavy fog rolling in right on schedule. I woke up in the guest room with my swimsuit straps crossed, sand somehow in my hair even though I never went near the water that evening, and a throbbing ache behind my eyes that no hangover had ever given me. Julian was asleep beside me, breathing slow and even, like nothing in the world was wrong. I waited until everyone left for a sailing trip the next afternoon, claiming a migraine to stay behind, and I retrieved the recorder with shaking hands. I sat on the edge of the dock, headphones in, and pressed play. The first 20 minutes were nothing. Ice clinking in glasses, Adelaide complaining about a contractor, Julian's older brother Sterling laughing at something I couldn't make out. Then I heard it. Sterling's voice, lower, more clipped than I'd ever heard it, talking to someone I didn't recognize at first. Just keep her thumb flat on the sensor before she goes under all the way. The app won't read a closed fist, and we've only got about 4 minutes before the dose wears off enough that she starts moving on her own. A woman's voice, brisk and businesslike, answered him. "We did this last time, Sterling. I know how to hold a thumb." I sat completely still on that dock, the lake water lapping against the pilings, and felt something inside my chest go cold and very, very clear. I kept listening. There was a third voice. Adelaide's. Just make sure her face isn't visible if she stirs. And for God's sake, don't let Julian come down here while you're doing it. He gets squeamish. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the recorder into the lake. I made myself keep listening, because somewhere underneath the fear, the auditor in me was already taking notes. They weren't just drugging me for fun, and they weren't doing it to humiliate me, the way Julian's mother humiliated me with her comments. They needed my thumbprint on a banking app while I was unconscious. I run the compliance department at 3 different credit unions, which meant that over the past year I'd quietly become the authorized secondary signer on a trust account Julian had set up for our future. One that, on paper, required either of our thumbprints for transfers over a certain threshold. I'd thought it was sweet, forward-thinking. I had been so unbelievably stupid. I didn't confront anyone that night. I didn't say a single word. I smiled at dinner. I kissed Julian goodnight. And the next morning, on the drive home, I called my friend Priya, who happened to be an associate at a federal financial crimes law firm in Detroit, and I told her everything, every detail, in the calmest voice I could manage, because I knew if I let myself feel it, I'd fall apart, and I didn't have time to fall apart yet. Priya didn't say that's crazy or are you sure? She said, send me the recording right now through this secure link and then go quiet. Don't tell him you know anything. Don't confront them. Let them think they're still winning. So that's exactly what I did. For 6 weeks, I went back to the lake house twice more. I let myself be the same wide-eyed, slightly too eager to please fiancé they'd decided I was. I drank exactly enough wine to seem normal and dumped half my glass into a potted fern when no one was looking. I faked the fog, the heaviness, the slow blink, and let them think their plan was working while I lay there fully conscious, memorizing every word, every footstep, every detail of how they moved through that boathouse like a well-rehearsed crew. What I learned, piece by piece, fed quietly to Priya and the financial crimes unit she'd looped in, was almost too elaborate to believe. The Ashworth real estate empire wasn't old money at all. It was built on a decades-long pattern of using family trust accounts, the kind set up for spouses and fiancé who trusted them completely, to launder development kickbacks from a string of lakefront condo projects that had been quietly overbilling a state infrastructure grant program. Sterling handled the technical side, Adelaide handled the social engineering, the long dinners, the wine, the carefully timed insults that kept everyone too emotionally rattled to think clearly. And Julian, my Julian, who I had genuinely loved, who I had pictured growing old with, knew. He'd known the entire time. He just made sure he was never the one holding my hand when it happened. The morning I finally agreed to wear a wire for the federal agents, my hands didn't shake at all. I remember that clearly because I expected them to. I drove up to the lake house for what Adelaide had billed as an engagement celebration brunch, a chance, she said, to finally announce the wedding date to extended family and a few of Julian's business associates. I knew because Priya had told me an hour earlier that 2 of those business associates were federal agents with the Financial Crimes Division, and that 3 more were stationed in unmarked cars along the private road. I wore a soft blue sundress. I let Adelaide kiss both my cheeks. I let her introduce me to her guests as the lovely girl who's finally taming our Julian. I smiled and thanked her and asked, in front of everyone, sweetly, innocently, whether we could maybe do a toast before brunch, since I had something I wanted to share. Adelaide, never one to pass up center stage, clinked her glass and gathered the room. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and instead of the toast everyone expected, I said, I'd like to thank this family for teaching me something I'll never forget. That the people who smile the widest at you are sometimes the ones counting the minutes until your thumb goes still. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard in my life. Sterling's face went white. Adelaide's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Julian stood up so fast his chair scraped against the deck, already saying my name like a question, like he could talk his way backward through the last 6 weeks. And that's when the 2 business associates I'd been introduced to an hour earlier stepped forward, badges out, and the rest of the agents came up the private road, lights off until they were already in the driveway, exactly the way Priya said they would. I walked off that deck with my head completely level, past Adelaide screaming something about lawyers, past Julian reaching for my arm and missing, past Sterling already being read his rights by a woman twice his size in a navy windbreaker. I didn't look back at that lake house once. I got into my own car, the one I'd paid for myself with my own salary, and I drove the 4 hours home with the radio off and the windows cracked, just breathing. It took 14 months for the case to fully unwind. The Ashworth Development Group collapsed entirely once federal auditors got into the books. My books, in a sense, since it was my profession that let me read between every line they'd tried to hide. Sterling was convicted on wire fraud and money laundering charges and is currently serving 16 years in a federal facility in Indiana. Adelaide was convicted as a co-conspirator for orchestrating the repeated drugging and identity theft, despite her lawyers arguing she merely hosted dinners. She's serving 11 years, and the lakefront compound, the one she used to remind me I'd never truly belong in, was seized by federal marshals and sold at auction to pay restitution to the families whose grant money had been stolen. Julian took a plea deal in exchange for testimony against his mother and brother, which kept him out of prison but cost him his license, his career, and every cent of the inheritance he'd been counting on. Last I heard, he was working construction in a town 3 hours from the lake, renting a single room above someone's garage. I didn't feel triumphant when Priya told me that. I felt something quieter and stranger, almost like grief for the version of him I'd once believed in. As for me, the case made headlines in regional financial news, and within a year I'd left my old firm and started my own forensic compliance consultancy in Ann Arbor, specializing somewhat fittingly in helping families and small institutions detect exactly the kind of quiet financial abuse that almost cost me everything. I have my own office now, glass walls, a view of the river, and a client list I built entirely myself. I choose who I work with. I choose who gets close to me. And I never, ever leave my drink unattended again. If there's one thing I want anyone listening to take from this, it's that gaslighting rarely sounds like a threat. It sounds like concern. It sounds like you just get tired up here, and you drank too much, and you're being ridiculous. But your body knows the difference between exhaustion and something being done to you, even when everyone around you insists otherwise. Trust that feeling, follow it quietly if you have to. And know that the truth, if you're patient enough and brave enough to go looking for it, always leaves a trail. Have you ever realized, all at once, that the people closest to you had been lying to your face the entire time? How did you finally catch them? Tell me in the comments below, and if you loved watching this family get exactly what they had coming, hit like and subscribe for more stories of survival and long overdue justice.